What's up, everybody? Good to see everybody for another episode of The Blind Pig, courtesy of BGObsession.com. Really special episode tonight, so we'll get through intros and then we can just kind of jump in. Top left is John. He hails on the board as Boone. Top right is Mark. He hails as Ohm. Bottom left is Bob. He hails as Neophyte. I am Derek. You can call me Silent Threat. And then in the bottom right of our screen, somebody who needs no introduction is a returning guest of The Blind Pig, who was on our podcast, I believe, February of last year. Is that right? When the middle of this thing was getting going with Dan Snyder. And we made her a promise, and we made ourselves a promise that we would track her down when Snyder actually announced he was going to sell the team. And it became official, 12 days ago, 13 days ago-ish, where he actually announced it. So Megan Imbert, welcome. We are so excited to have an actual conversation with you now post-sale announcement.
Here.
And I know you've been around. I'd love to hear your instant reaction about, how you're feeling. But before you do, I last podcast wanted to point something out. There's a lot of celebration and smiles surrounding this, but I think I can speak for everybody on the board, everybody on this podcast, that what happened was not good to get us here. We're celebrating that he has now sold the team. We are not happy that what happened did happen in order to get to this point. So while we are celebrating Dan Snyder selling the team, I don't want the people like you and numerous other men and women who had to deal with nonsense and just terrible work environment and unexplainable and disgusting behavior, for him to be finally brought to the woodshed to put him in his place. So I say that to say we're finally here. I'd love to pop champagne. I'm sorry everybody had to go through with what they did, but Megan, please, the floor is yours. Let us get your reaction.
Well, thank you for having me again, and I really appreciate it. And super pumped to see the Release the Report shirt on, because that's still something that's obviously a big part of our mission. So naturally, we're thrilled about the Snyder selling. We're thrilled for DC Sports. I think myself, it's just been a roller coaster of emotions. We're coming up in July on 3 years of this first Washington Post article going live. So it's been a wave of emotions, everything from what we've dealt with personally, the NFL's reaction, the various investigations, interacting with Congress. Like, never in a million years would have thought that would have been my life, So there's a lot to process. I think there's a lot of goodness coming out of this, but then at the same time, to your point, one of the biggest reasons we went on record was this is bigger than Washington. It's bigger than the NFL. This is a workplace issue. And I'm hoping that the work that we're doing and our persistence is going to really make a difference for other people. And maybe other people are brave because of the stories and what's coming to fruition. So I'm definitely pumped. I'd love to have that glass of champagne. I would absolutely go to a game in the future. But right now I'm still processing. I'm excited, but I am upset that it wasn't because the other owners did the right thing. It wasn't because they voted him out. It's very unfortunate. And then, as you can see, it looks like Goodell's contract's likely being renewed as well. So it's up against these really big, powerful forces. So I do appreciate all of the support. And I know all the fans are so tired of hearing about Snyder. And I apologize, because until we feel like there's truly some accountability and these other investigations are done, hopefully there's more to celebrate as a fan base if he really is held accountable.
Megan, that was one of the main things I wanted to ask you tonight is how do you have to separate the Snyder and Commanders thing from the actual workplace issue. How has the conversation changed? I know you have different conversations than we do. And all of the noise that you've been dealing with for so long, it has to have started to change subtly. The obvious question is, are you concerned that once the big bright lights of an NFL thing fade away, that the issue will fade away, either specifically with the team or just in general in society and all the real important stuff that people don't talk about enough?
It's a really great question. I'm not worried because I know I'm involved and the people that are involved, and whether people think we're, crazy, persistent. I think this situation's really helped us realize, the power of one, the power of two, the power of three people, or whatever it might be. And I think it's on us to continue, and the fans and other people, to want to see change and really realize, like, all of this was a domino effect, and the fans had a role in it too, and whether or not they supported, and if they, voiced their concerns. So, a lot of people were very critical of Congress's involvement, and without Congress's involvement, we would have never known about the common interest legal agreement between the NFL and Dan Snyder. We wouldn't have known about this 100+ page dossier from private investigators and whatnot. So there's a lot of elements here. And I think just because I know myself, and if I'm committed to something, I'm going to do whatever in my power to try to make the change happen. That's just a personality thing. It's a grit thing. I don't know what you want to call that. And I think we have, some powerhouse attorneys, and then there's other folks too that are like, you all have been really wronged by the NFL here. That I think it drew the attention of people that might not even be sports fans, but are fans of truth and justice, and people having courage and integrity. So that's a very loaded answer, but I'm saying no, just because we're not going to let it. I, myself, other people, we're not going to let it fade away.
I think one of the problems is, because I normally politically, I would probably be one of those people saying, what's Congress doing? Aren't there more important things than, XYZ? But I think the problem is the NFL is so dysfunctional, the power structure, whether you want to call it old boys network, whatever you want to call it, a rich old boys network, there's no oversight. There's really no effective independent oversight like every other major corporation in America, that's not living in 1960s America like the NFL is. They have some kind of a legitimate independent board that makes oversight decisions and make sure that they're not going to get themselves into big trouble. And the NFL clearly doesn't have that. They have a bought and paid for spokesperson, Roger Goodell, whose really only interest, which is why he got his contract renewed or is about to, is to protect the ownership. It's not to do right by every NFL employee and player. And in fact, a lot of times it's in direct opposition to that. And so in that environment, what option is there other than to go to Congress or to attack it politically or publicly? I think that was something that had to happen, whether or not you think Congress should technically be involved or not. So I'm glad they got involved.
John, you touched on a couple of things there. I think there's definitely multifacets of the conversation in terms of what power do we have to change the system when the system's investigating themselves, or they're paying the law firms. That I don't necessarily have an answer for today. My recommendation across the board is, especially within the NFL, they need to have a third-party entity do the investigations. And maybe it's a number of law firms that have to kind of work together so that there is not cover-ups or corruption or whatnot. Yeah, I think you brought up some really great points. I think there's still legal remedies that we haven't leveraged yet. When you think about the long game and whatever else, if we ever get to discovery in certain situations, like we don't have an active lawsuit. Not to say I don't think we could, we just haven't been in it for that. So I think that's one of those cards that ultimately might get played. There's also, I have to believe too, in the integrity of some of the law firms too. And I have questions on some of the cases some of these representatives may have taken in the past or whatnot. But, Mary Jo White, I think at this point too, her reputation could be called into question. Now, at the same time, she's been a huge client of the NFL for years. Does she care about that? She's making a ton of money off of the various investigations they've put her in charge of. But I have to believe that some of these folks that, take these oaths are wanting to see and cultivate change. But I also believe that there's different people like Jim Trotter, I'll use him as an example, from the NFL media. who recently did not get renewed from the NFL. He's the one the past 2 years at the Goodell's press conference around the Super Bowl was questioning diversity within that department. He's no longer renewed. He did not sign an NDA. He did not take additional pay to be quiet. I think folks like him, you're starting to see, the person from the Cardinals, you're starting to see more people starting to be bold and talk about things. And I think we're still at the very infant stage of this. And this is, I could compare the NFL almost to a government, given how much money flows in and out, the partners, the whole ecosystem. I mean, you can't even have the Thanksgiving holiday now without like a Black Friday game, whatever. Like it's a part of our society. So I think it's going to revolve around people putting pressure on and not accepting it like we're back to football and really caring about the bigger picture.
So I heard Darren Haynes at the owners meeting. I think it was Darren Haynes ask a direct question of Roger Goodell. I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said, what kind of guarantees or processes are you all looking at to put into place to make sure that people that bring concerns forward or abuse allegations forward, that they're not retaliated against, that, like the stuff that every corporation in America would have already in place in terms of policy and procedure? And I don't know how you felt about Goodell's. I felt like Goodell did what he usually does, which is he gave a very non-committal, technically he answered it, but he didn't really say anything. So I just wondered what your reaction was to that. I'm sure you were aware of that.
Yeah, 100%. I actually was pinging Darren to repeatedly ask that question because our lawyers had asked Roger, and the NFL in particular, they wrote a letter stating we would like to make sure that there's protections in place for the people that have come forward so there isn't future retaliation from the Snyders or anyone else that might be impacted by the sale or what might come out of a report. And we never got a response, which is also predictable but unfortunate. And it also should send a message to other former or current franchise employees like the priority is not us, right? So the response was, again, another no answer by Goodell. It didn't surprise me. The whole thing on we'll address it. It's unfortunate because, as they look at putting together this agreement of a sale, it looks like that line item on as the team becomes more profitable, the Snyders are going to get upwards of maybe another $200 million. So it shouldn't be that difficult, in my opinion. And hopefully the new owners are going to be paying attention, or maybe they've heard us, maybe they care. I'm hoping that somehow, they could put something like that in a contract, or I don't know all the legal things that are going to happen, but certainly it seems like a very basic thing to do. So I'm in a weird spot of, I want the NFL to do and leverage their power to help protect us and protect future employees, and frankly, current employees that probably participated in some of these investigations. And then on the flip side, I'm disappointed and upset at the NFL for the cover up and completely misleading us. So it's a very weird dynamic to be in. But yeah, Roger's answer was definitely a no answer. And I'm glad that Darren Haynes and other reporters have been persistent with their questions. Similarly, Jerry Jones, right? Darren interviewed him the last owners meeting, and Jerry Jones is talking about how he knows everything that's in the report and all of this. And then this week was like, I don't need to see anything. I haven't seen anything, but I know exactly how that franchise was operated. So it's a really interesting montage that Darren produced of like the first answer versus this answer. And, okay, if you knew how it was operated, he doesn't really have his own house in order either. So right. From my perspective, I've spoken out about the Cowboys and, his first line of command and PR, like, I'm going to keep speaking out as I see the BS, frankly. So, I'm not just focused on Washington. Like, Jerry, what are you doing?
It makes you wonder if the NFL if they're savvy enough to realize what you just said is that, I sometimes I wonder if they think we'll just get Snyder out of here and then all this will calm down and go away. And I wonder, like, first of all, I wonder, is there really like a misogynistic culture like what we've just seen the tip of the iceberg on? Probably. in other organizations, do the owners realize like that this might be their chance to like do something about it before something similar happens to
Or
other?
are they just scrambling to put a lid on it and cover it up and whitewash it before anybody does come out and speak about it?
I think there's probably a mixture. I've heard some off the record things on certain names, maybe some people not getting hired, leaving jobs, not getting hired. Like, I think there's some underground things that probably have happened in terms of, you know, reputations of certain folks, or getting their policies in place. I mean, part of the process was, hey, this is how, you know, fundamentally you should have an HR department. What about the players and the coaches also taking HR training and understanding what sexual harassment is? So there's basic things that I think would be really easy wins, that I would hope that they would institute across all the teams, and have some checks and balances, right? I think, to your point, this is a very big power structure in terms of kind of this untouchable environment, like you said before. Like, Goodell's making so much money, there's no one really checking him unless, sadly, a government agency gets involved. So I think it's kind of fascinating just how it's set up. But yeah, I absolutely think there's certain organizations I've heard really good things about. There's others absolutely not. So, and that's across sports. I've had, you know, even after the Suns ownership changed, I heard from some of those employees. So now this has become kind of a thing, right? And we're part of a weird club
Yeah.
of
Club
ourselves.
club nobody wanted to be part of.
Yeah.
So to that end, and I don't know if you pay attention to sports outside the United States at all, but there's a huge debate at the moment in the UK about setting up a government agency and government oversight over professional soccer in England, and partially to do with this, partially to do with ownership. I mean, they've got a much broader ownership base, right? You've got Russian oligarchs and Middle Eastern oil, and they have things we don't have to deal with in the United States, at least at this point in time. But would you like to see a government agency created to oversee professional sports in this country?
I think it's really an interesting concept. And no, I didn't know that. I'm going to look into it now. I don't think it would be a bad idea, especially now as you have the gambling and other things that are going on. And I think if you look at the track record of even the NFL alone, some of the investigations, the different cover-ups, and the questionable penalties for certain people and their behavior versus other people, when you look at the bylaws, like, an owner should be held even at a higher standard than a player. And so I don't feel like they've done the best with any checks and balances. And one of the points around transparency and why the release of the report is so important is it can set a precedent. And on top of that, when you really can understand, like, how are you going to do a punishment if you don't know what the crime is, right? And so that's a big component that is really frustrating. And also for people to truly heal and move on. I think the more I'm thinking about it, I absolutely think it would be an interesting concept. Well, you know, I'm sure it would delay processes and have some more red tape, but they haven't proven to do it well. And, you know, the hypocritical statements of even Roger with the Cowboys, oh, they did an investigation themselves. And then later, wait, a team can't investigate themselves. Like, they're not doing it well. So somebody needs to.
And it doesn't even have to be something that overt. It's like, I work in healthcare, and the worst possible thing as a healthcare leader that can happen is some employee anonymously picks up the phone, that corporate compliance hotline, and makes a complaint. And because it's not so much that it's a terrible thing in and of itself, because it may turn out to be just a disgruntled employee, and there may be nothing there in the complaint, but it requires so much. It requires a response. It requires it within a certain time period by certain leadership. It requires transparency, self-reporting, all this other stuff. And so it's like a final safety net for any employee, that if you see something, that's not right, and you can report it anonymously, you can report it without any fear of retaliation, and something is going to be, it's at least going to be given some attention. And it doesn't seem like the NFL even has anything remotely like that.
I think that's exactly what we need. When I said third party, the more I'm talking to you about it and the fact that this does exist for other industries, I think it's exactly what they need. Because if anyone's learning from our experience, like I'm not calling up Roger Goodell to tell him about my experiences because it's obviously getting swept and cover up. I think to the point earlier too is I think we've been underestimated the entire time because they're used to just writing a check to people and making them be quiet and go away. And so this whole turn of events, I think, has surprised them. Right now, we're an annoyance, we're a pest that hasn't gone away. But at the same time, like the Congress involvement was amazing to me, where it was like, wow, what a grassroots effort. And meeting with staffers, meeting with these people. Meanwhile, the NFL and Snyder are paying how much millions for lobbyists, right? And then we're just briefing them on what we know and why we want them to care as constituents, right? So it was a really interesting process to be a part of. So I think that would 100% be something that they need to do and across all the different sports leagues. And I'm not sure if any of the other leagues have like a third party or something, but certainly I wouldn't call up now knowing like they really are not caring, and they're gonna call up their friend, and chances are the person that reported it is losing their job.
Well, I guarantee you the other professional leagues in this country are carefully watching how this all plays out, because it won't end here. This isn't going away. It's not going away.
No, but
Megan, go ahead, Bob.
No, well, I was going to take that and say, I don't think the NFL realizes that yet, Mark. I think for the NFL, this is still very much business as usual. And business as usual is deny and do what it takes to make it disappear from the headlines and then wait for the fury to leave. Right. And I don't see it going. I don't see the fury going away this time.
We're the fury.
Right. And I don't see the NFL figuring that out yet.
Be the fury. I'm making a t-shirt.
There you go. It's such an interesting point too. And when you think about the technology age that we're in as well, like had this gone on and it's 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or whatever, before we had smartphones and we could share the information the way we can now, I think the times have completely changed. So you have some of these people that have been a part of these circles, and, you know, the Snyder's attorney or former attorney that represented him at the meeting, and then Jerry Jones talking, like all the newscasts pick that up. Whereas like those are usually like those secret conversations that, you know, you wouldn't see years ago. So I think that's something that this era of where we are with technology and the sharing of information is pretty fascinating, because we are able to have on our side checks and balances, or I am able to talk to a reporter via text or whatever instantaneously. Like as someone's in that press conference room or something, I'm like, you know, talking to someone that's right there. So I think that's kind of exciting. And I think it's also, to Mark's point, I think people are watching. They're watching how they're responding. What do we have in place? How is this going? And also how rapidly, like we all know so many people doubted whether or not Snyder's would sell. I always felt it would happen, but I mean, 3 years into this, I think it's kind of soon. I thought it would have been maybe a 5 or longer years. Yeah, I think it's just really interesting.
One other thing I don't want to gloss over, to your point, that there's such a level of contact. Now the 24-hour news cycle is about a 24-second news cycle also. So the efforts and the you know, the push to maintain this for multiple years in and of itself is a whole nother level of this conversation. Because in years past, something hits the Washington Post or another periodical of print, you know, it's out on a Sunday paper, people are talking about it for a couple of days. Now something hits your timeline, and within 30 seconds you've moved on to the next topic on your timeline. So I do wonder, like, and I don't know if you can even get into this, but are there more, are you in your circle, I guess, to put it, for lack of a better term, the fury, are you guys in conversation about what the next steps are going to be beyond releasing the report? Like, I know you guys aren't looking at the report as being the end game. As you've said multiple times, that there's other things that you guys are focused on. Have you guys had these conversations? Like, what else is on your docket, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, we have bits and pieces of conversations, and I think as this journey sort of progresses, it's one thing at a time, right? So I think the biggest thing right now is when and how much of the Mary Jo White report is actually going to be released. And then I hear Goodell say finding. So that's going to be interesting. So that's number one. In our minds, naturally we're concerned for ourselves later on down the road. We know that Snyder's a pretty vindictive person. I think one thing that could be interesting and we would be open to is also, because we did work for this franchise, we would like to see improvements made. We're not opposed to ever conversating with new ownership, or frankly, we've tried to meet with the league, they ignore us. And so I think that's also a mistake in terms of one of the reasons why I think this continues to creep up into the news cycle too, is when you think about some of the journalists as well, part of the reason why they get into this craft is because they are seeking truth. And when they see how we've been really, the cover up, and I mean, you take Deflategate, stuff like that was bad enough, but now you're talking about like hundreds of people, if not more, and the gravity of the issue. I think this also charges them, like, this is an impactful story for them to continue to try to surface the truth and get accountability, or see people in power that shouldn't be. And so I think there's a little bit of an interesting take on it because of the human factor, and also how much this could impact the future. So it's been a compelling situation, I think, for whether it's the poor beat reporters that just want to report on football. But then keep in mind, some of them, like I was a little young intern working next to them, and now they're, on national news, which is like, wow. I think some of them also have felt, and I've heard this, like, could I have done more? Or the Post worked on the first story for years. Like, people have been working on some of these stories for years. So I think that's a component too, is just the impact that, I'm sure someone like a Don Venata, a Will Hobson, Liz Clark, they probably all could earn Pulitzers from their work on this, right? These are career making situations for them in some weird realm.
Well, and I think you bring up a very good point. If this were not in the sports realm, you'd have major league Pulitzer Prize winning, reporters fighting over getting this story. And somebody would be the next, Ed Woodward and Roger Bernstein over this, right? I mean, but it is a sports story, which I think is actually kind of sad, because it's every bit as big the scandal as it would be if this weren't an NFL owner and were a senator or a representative. It is every bit the human story that it would be the otherwise. But because it's tied to a sport.
Well, it's not just tied to a sport, it's the sport. And they just signed a contract with Peacock to stream a playoff game, and they got $114 million for it.
Yeah.
The
one thing I would bring up too that's bothered me, especially when we wrote our letters to the other owners, is that, in my opinion, it's not just a sports story. When you look at the resumes of these owners, some of these owners are owning sports franchises of other leagues. Some of them have other businesses. Like, this entire situation made me wonder, like, obviously we know Snyder owned like Six Flags, Dick Clark Productions, Johnny Rockets, like,
which he completely drove right into the ground, by the way.
But what happened in those organizations as well, right? Like, and keep in mind, some of the people that he's kept in his circle have helped him throughout his career in these different entities. So while it is a sports story, these billionaire people have a whole heck of a lot of impact in other industries as well. So that's the part I find really twisty and interesting.
It makes you wonder, it's pretty topical right now as we're trying to finalize a new ownership group, but how much of the vetting is going to what kind of character and background and past experience of the leadership that you're bringing in at the top of the food chain? Is it just the finances? Is it just, are they financially viable and gonna be able to, turn a profit with the franchise, or are they looking beyond that? Because clearly in the past, back in the 90s, when Dan Snyder slipped through the crack Obviously, no one was really looking at what kind of an individual he really was and what kind of, personal ethics he had, because he didn't have any. You said something a minute ago I wanted to bring up, because we had a topic on, we have a lot of football related topics on our board. Imagine that. And one of the topics that I posted was prioritizing what should the new ownership group do first. And of course, there was a lot of stuff in there: change the name, hire a GM, all the normal fan stuff you would expect to see. But I added an option for have the new ownership sit down and talk to former employees and kind of get an overview of what transpired there previously. And I don't know that if anything like that could ever happen with like the Harris group, but it is something that I'm going to be watching to see whether because what we've heard, that we've heard so far is ghosts of Christmas past, right? That's what we've heard is I don't know nothing about that. That was before I got here. And I mean, let's be honest, that's just not good enough now. That doesn't rise to the bar that we got to get over. So I'm really hoping that Josh Harris or someone close to him and the other new prospective owners, that it crosses their mind that they really need to make sure that this nothing like this could ever happen again. And what would they do if it did, or what would they do if they had employees reporting abuse and harassment?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I'm hopeful that that's an option. I also think that would help where they could actually say, hey, we hear you. Like, they wouldn't be in a position, frankly, without the brave people that came forward and started to expose things either. And not to say they owe us anything, but I think it would also help reconcile a few things and give us assurances that they do want to have an above board organization, and one that could bring championships back to this city. And I do think there's been reflections of some poor leadership, Jason being one of those with his reference. I think he's making light of the situation, and it comes off completely unprofessional. He's the president of the team, and he was dismissive of everything that was going on. I think that was a really big mistake on his part. But he also has not taken any accountability for the statement. I believe in people having second chances and saying, I'm sorry, or that was unprofessional of me. Not necessarily like months or a year down the road, but like thinking through, I shouldn't have said that. And I realized that they're in a tough spot, but I think it was completely unprofessional, and they've had opportunities to meet with us as well. So I can be very clear, like, we've reached out to different groups of people. I think as well, with some of the folks that might be a part of the investor group that are DC, like locals that were fans of the team, I absolutely think they've probably been paying attention and want to make sure, and maybe those 17 or whatever, I don't know how many of them would participate in ownership meetings, but I'm really hopeful there's a few of them that could actually help challenge if they see something at these owners meetings. Like, they need people in the ownership circle that's going to challenge the status quo. And, Magic Johnson, obviously I don't know him personally, but I've heard him speak a few times, and he seems like a really smart business leader in terms of bringing competent people around him and not being so focused on him, the ego. And I'm hopeful, and I've heard nothing but good things about the other folks. So it's a really good, interesting point. And I think it would be all around like a big giant hug of like, hey, let's talk about everything that happened. What would you improve? Blah, blah, blah. And I think it would go a long way. I think the fans would appreciate that too, where it was like, and I can't help but it's hard to process the emotions. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but like Joe Gibbs came out with his statement, and I knew Joe. He was coach when I was there. It's hard for me to see like the statement, well, it reads in of itself about leadership, but like, why couldn't that statement have come out in the past 3 years, or have any kind of statement on, wow, I'm really sorry to see this, right? Like, he just kind of was hands off, but hey, I'm going to work with that new ownership team to get this team back where it needs to be. So I know that there's tons of books on leadership, but I feel like, especially an icon like Gibbs, he's someone like the fan base would automatically listen to, rally around. So it's just processing a lot and seeing how people are responding. I think they're going to do really well. I mean, they're probably surging with ticket sales, but then I'm wondering, is all that money going to Snyder still until he signs? Like wait until the deal is sealed before you buy your tickets. That's just my wondering.
Megan, I want to ask you, you're
Yeah.
wearing the Release the Report shirt. John's wearing it. Derek's got it hanging up behind him, I think. Walk me through, you've had a lot of time to think about this. Walk me through when it does get released. How do you anticipate that playing out? What we all have our ideas, I'm sure, but you're so much closer to it. I'd love to know how that looks when you look forward to the day after.
Well, I think for me, it's similar to what Lisa Banks, our attorney, said. We want to make sure we have assurances from Mary Jo White that these are in fact her findings. Ideally, I'd like to see an actual thorough report. If Deflategate got over 240 pages, you're telling me our experiences, 20 years plus of an owner, like doesn't warrant more than 4 bullet points of, yeah, I ran a terrible organization. So I think my reaction is all telling of what is actually released. And I also believe the timing of this is really interesting. I feel like they've used that sort of as a leverage point for him to sell the team. And there's probably, this is just me speculating, my own assumption of like, maybe there's different versions of what we're going to decide to share based on when you decide you're going to sell. And I really, really hope it's not a watered down version. If it is, I absolutely believe my lawyers are going to be upset and hopefully there's some actions taken.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah.
Are they prepared to go to the mat?
I hope so. I hope
Legally.
so. I hope so because it's really unfortunate and unless you've lived it, like for someone to go through this process of investigations, questioning, hours, it's emotional, it's exhausting, and to do that repeatedly. Because if you think about it, some folks have done it with different agencies, the law firm, Congress, Wilkinson, like it's a lot. So I really hope like they're prepared if it's not what we expect, or what Mary Jo White would really put her stamp of approval. It's hard to not have closure around like Wilkinson, for example, because we know over 140 people participated, and to just have that completely, unswept under the rug. And I completely believe the junkies had like either a version or something that showed the recommendations. It's just unfortunate that, unless discovery comes up, like I know Gruden still has his case out there in Vegas, and I hope that he goes to discovery because we all know who we think, released those emails. I think there's still more to come, but obviously if we see what we think is like a true thorough report released, I think there's going to be like a big exhale. There's probably gonna be a lot of tears. I have a feeling too, like when we get to a point of an actual sale, I think we deserve to celebrate a little bit. I know it's not our full end game right now, but I think we need to look at the wins along the way because this has been a lot.
It's going to mark a big battle win, but the war, and we've been talking about this for a while, the war, we're just kind of getting ramped up for this thing. The other leagues, the NFL owners, old boy network, by if nothing else by attrition, as these guys age out, younger owners are coming in who are of a different generation and hopefully a different mindset. Those conversations in the owners' meetings rooms are going to get very interesting over the next few years too. And before I forget to ask you, the advertisers came up. Is this part of the conversation that you and in your circle have had about really going after the advertisers? That's what tends to bring down empires, right? When all of a sudden the advertising money goes away. What about that angle? I have not followed it very well.
That's been a very frustrating angle for me, because we've gone after that angle, and I know there were some fans that created boycottdan.com, and we had Anheuser-Busch. It was actually my birthday last year. I'll never forget when they pulled out their sponsorship from the team, but not from the league. I think it's a really valid point. I think I think a push to some of the corporate entities on really realizing, you know, especially those that care about culture, values. If you don't follow the NFL, I'm not sure how many people are really acutely aware of what's been going on, except for, you know, if they pay attention to some of the news when they were breaking stories. But I still think this is still one of those situations where people don't really realize what might be happening. So the people in charge of those partnerships, unless there's pressure on, right? I mean, it's definitely an angle. That's the amount of money that's flowing through the league is incredible. It's tough. It's a tough one.
I'm glad you talked about the Mary Jo White, the timing of it, because I don't know about you. You might not be as cynical as I am at this point, but every time I've heard the report is on, the process is ongoing, but you know, I'm like, you're lying. It's done. That report's been it's sitting on someone's
Well,
desk.
and then the report that Snyder hasn't even talked to Mary Jo White, and he won't apparently.
Yeah, he
But
won't. I don't
it's
think he
either
will.
I tell myself that it's the reason we haven't gotten those results is the NFL doesn't want anything to scuttle the owners, the sale of the team. They want him out of here. They don't want to antagonize him any more than that. This is the good version. They don't want to antagonize him any more than they have to get to in order to expedite getting him out of here. That's the positive take. The less positive take is they don't want to embarrass him, which to me is, I hope it's not that, because if anyone ever deserved to be dragged through the mud, you know, in public before he can, you know, toddle off to Europe to live out the rest of his billionaire life, that guy deserves for the truth to come out while
I
he's still in the spotlight.
I have two thoughts on this. One, intuitively, I think if they released it before the sale, I wonder if it would make the value go down. I wonder if it would force the value to go down. So if I learned anything in this lesson, money is everything to them. So if it made the value of the team goes down, that impacts future sales. Now they have this huge benchmark of where they could sell a team for, and it's likely only going to increase. So that's number one. I don't think they're worried about embarrassing him as much as they're worried about what dirt he really does have on them and what dirt he might have on some of those systemic things that we sort of talked about and how things are operated or whatnot. Not to say he does, but I would believe he probably does, especially if he's had like the rumors of the PIs and the ESPN reporting, I think is 100% accurate. So I think there's a matter of that and others knowing that they might be caught up in it. And I think that's the piece that unknown factor is what's probably most concerning. I do think it's interesting though, because I agree with you. My gut would say they can say they're waiting for Dan to participate. Why would he ever participate unless he legally is obligated to?
Right.
He's not going to implicate himself further. I mean, that's the challenge with this whole investigation system. And I know we brought it up a few times, but I think it's the biggest takeaway of all of this is, you know, Mary Jo's a client of the NFL. Whatever and whenever they'll release whatever it is. And I'm like, is that gonna, you know, do I need to go picket at the NFL? Do I need to show up at every owner meeting? Do I, you know, I mean, that might be the level of energy that this has to go towards. But yeah, it's a powerful system. So I don't know what's to come, but I don't want to say I'm cynical, but I absolutely have had my thoughts on the day that the NFL gave the Snyders 100% ownership was one of the worst days probably of my life in the past, especially 3 years. That signaled to me like this is not good. And
It wasn't that long ago either. It wasn't very long ago.
Well,
it happened.
So then I let me throw a scenario to you there, Megan, because we haven't had this conversation, and the guys on the board have heard me talking about this for 3 years. What if that all along was to get to this point now, where they gave him 100% because they knew that he couldn't afford it, and he would be forced to sell sooner rather than later because he couldn't pay the bills anymore?
I think it was an eye-opening revelation someone gave me where they were like, it makes it for a cleaner sale. So I don't necessarily disagree there. I think so it's a really good point. I think it's the notion of, when Roger had that press conference saying he wasn't going to release any of the Wilkinson stuff to protect us, but it wasn't until Congress was able to tell us about the common interest legal agreement. It's one of those where like my trust is everything and my trust has been breached with the NFL. But I see your point. I think it makes for a clean sale. And frankly, those other owners wanted to get the heck out of it as soon as they could anyway.
I'm not
sure
defending
now-
the NFL. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
They're all
It's a good point.
dirtballs. But I start to wonder if when the name change happened, or before the name change happened, Nike said they were pulling the equipment. That was the first domino to fall that said the NFL is a part of it and they want Snyder out, and the fastest thing they can do without having a vote is make it so he can't afford to pay the bills anymore.
Mm.
So that I not to like
No, I
just
think
said that
I think it's a really interesting point. And I think like I said, everything that they care about has been money oriented and what's going to make a process easier for them. That's the business side, right? That they're concerned with. It is just unfortunate. It makes me wonder too, like about the owners that got out, like how are they feeling right now? Those would be some interesting interviews of like how much Snyder's going to walk away with, that they, you know what I mean? That's a lot of money, but they cut their ties.
Well, you know what? He is going to need to put some of that money in a piggy bank, because he's going to be paying legal bills for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Because
Maybe
just
high
he's no
yield on
longer,
that.
he is not going to be the owner of the team anymore, but his ghosts are going to pursue him. You're not going away. There are others who won't go away. I think there's a price to be paid.
I'm also hopeful there's some agencies that might collect at some point. And I think that would be, in my mind, like if he actually was held accountable for anything, if he did commit crimes, like truly that they can prove, I mean, that would be the celebration.
There was something criminal. Oh my God, yes. Because essentially it always has seemed to me like the best case scenario is going to be a successful civil suit where he's hit with a big, massive fine, and that, you hit a rich guy in the wallet, that hurts. As much as I would like to see that, I would like to see him in an orange suit, just for 30 days, just a symbolic something. Charge him with something criminal, which it may well be that all that gets him is his tax returns, right? It might be a Capone deal. It might be that they don't get him for all the horrible shit that he did, which is why you're sitting here talking to us. But
I think the best we're going to be able to hope for, other than him being shamed out of NFL ownership, is he's going to be in the doghouse with his wife for the rest of his life.
The rest of their marriage.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of sympathy. I'm sorry for her either. And this is speaking out of
No.
turn. I don't know the woman, but she has stood by that man through things that I would have thought would have long since sent her running for the hills.
Yeah. Yeah. I consider my wife among some of the most loyal women I know, but I can tell you what, that if I were being drugged through the mud for the things he's being drugged through the mud for, with this much evidence out there, she would have long ago gone, "You're on your own. Idiot. You're on your own. And whatever you get, you deserve."
Well, and if you remember the Adam Schefter podcast with her, and that was like her first and only press interview, right? I don't know if y'all remember that, but it was very much, how are they doing this to my family? It was interesting. And I imagine it's stressful for their, they have kids and other things, but again, it was never one of those like, I can't believe this was happening and we're responsible. It was this victim mentality. And that's a shame, because I think at the end of the day, I've become so much more interested in like leadership conversations and workplace culture, that it's like, there's a couple key things: a bit of compassion, an ounce of compassion, that accountability of simply, like I said before, you could say you're sorry, or, hey, I did this, or whatever. They really might not even be in this situation had just lower your ego a little bit or take some sort of accountability. It was just this deny, send out my own press reports and get after the PIs and do all this stuff. It was like he had his own fury. He's his own fury. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons. I think if there's leaders that are listening, it's like, take accountability for your mistakes, own them. And that's to the point earlier of like the other owners living in glass houses or whatnot, but like they absolutely should take this as a lesson of like, humble yourself. You're nothing without your employees. You're nothing without your employees. And how you treat people really does matter. And you can say you're sorry. I mean, it's really hard too to just, there's certain people like, you like a Larry Michael, right? My old boss. Deny. I don't know what it's going to be like the day I ever run into him face to face. It's going to be probably very hard. But I think about those things. He's likely not thinking about those things, but I sit there and I'm like, you could have just done the right thing and own it and tell the truth, right? And I realize the truth takes courage, but there's a lot of elements and complexities to the situation where it's like, if you just owned it a little bit and you humble yourself and you take a little accountability, like you probably wouldn't even be in the situation.
Mhm.
It's this power dynamic and treating people like, you're better than them. And, I've always had this kind of quote, and it might have started actually when I started working for the team, when I was around all this money, and it was like, take your bank account away, take your title away. Who are you? Who are you at the end of the day? I remember having a conversation with one of the players, and somebody gave me some sass on something. I was like, the only thing cooler about you than me is your bank account. And even then I was like, the ultimate comeback for a Snyder situation right now would be use that money for good. What an amazing comeback that could be if you actually spent that money to do amazing things with.
I am not putting my money on that horse, Megan.
No.
I have
No.
to, I'm putting it out in the universe.
The real question
I
is, I want to know who
apologize.
you.
I apologize. I need to roll out of here. Megan, thank you
Thank you.
for your passion, for the fury, for all of it. It's
The fury.
important, and keep up the good fight.
Thank you.
Good night, gentlemen.
Night.
Hey, Mark.
So I wanted to say one last thing.
Hold on, before you go on, I need to know who you mic dropped the player that you mic dropped against that you said, hold on, let me see. I want to know who it is. Please, come on.
You don't have to answer.
That may be an off the air thing, Derek.
I should say it. What if I said it's in the Wilkinson report?
Oh,
That would be
Jesus.
incentive for people, right?
So Goodell knows, and it's orally. Yeah, exactly. Okay. All right. I got you.
No, I had some good relationships for sure, but yeah, certainly, I blame my brothers. I have two older brothers, and like I have a backbone, and even though despite the situations, like there were moments where I was like, yeah, no, we're not going there.
So I just wanted to mention one thing, and I don't know if that is all that important to say, but since I have you as a captive audience member, I wanted to mention that after the last time we talked, there was a lot of conversation on Twitter and other social media outlets, like there always is. And I remember a comment and I don't know whether I said it, I don't think I said it, I was just in the conversation about, well, if that were my wife or that were my daughter, that would really piss me off, talking about what went down at Redskins Park under Snyder's tenure. And you made the comment at the time that like, how and you said it nicely because you're always nice, but you said basically that irks the hell out of you because why should it take it being your wife or your daughter? Why can't it just be wrong? And no matter who it is. And I think at the time I was like, wait a minute. I know I said that. I bet you if we went back and watched the first pod we did with you, we probably said it. That, I have young daughters, but I thought about that a lot. And I think I pushed back originally and said, that's how I came to my empathy for these women, is that, I'm connecting it with people that I love. But then I thought about it, and it kind of bugged me, because I'm like, maybe I'm not evolved enough yet. So I thought about it for a long time, and it suddenly struck me that, like, I think part of the problem, and I think it's all across American society with men, maybe not all men, but men like me, that we have this protective instinct, and I might say protective, someone else might say paternalistic, I don't know. But we have this protective instinct that's like genetically wired in us. And so all of this time prior to you making that comment, I think I was like, these women need to be protected. These women, this is wrong. What if it was my daughter? What if it was my wife? And then it suddenly dawned on me that, like, the only people that had the balls to come forward and to fight like hell and to take all of the arrows that came flying back at them were the women involved in this situation. So maybe we ought to think about it. You don't really need our protection. That's not what you need. What you need is fairness and justice and decency and respect, just like anyone else. And so anyway, I just wanted to thank you, because it made me think about, okay, what
I love that. I love that though, because I think, and I've learned a lot in this process too. And, Ron Rivera, I think he seems like a upstanding human, but one of the first things he said in July when that article came out was related to, I have a daughter in this building. And it was like, that does sting, because it shouldn't take having a daughter, but I understand the relatable factor of how, and this happens with, like, I hate to bring up like cancer or illnesses, but sometimes I always struggled when I was like volunteer for different charity organizations, and I was always interested in other things, and people were critical of me, like, you need to just focus on one thing. And it was like, well, no, like, all of these causes could be important, but until someone is impacted, sometimes they don't care, or they just aren't educated. And I think especially men in this, our business world, and I'm in a male dominated industry still today in tech, but it's just that level of awareness of simple things like, people being interrupted, whether man or woman. How do we make sure, like, wait, they weren't done with their thought? How do we have that respectful dialogue? And I know people like to avoid conflict, but it's definitely one of those items that I hope people are just a little bit more aware of. But I appreciate you bringing it up, because I think these are some of the challenging conversations that need to kind of happen. Where it's like, I know it's best of intention and you genuinely care, and that was your way of relating, and like, oh my God. Well, I think about, there is a fella on Twitter right now who I know is, I'm not sure whose husband, but one of the cheerleaders likely in one of those videos, right? And I messaged him like, I don't know how you're not like really upset and how you're handling that. And to know, like, your wife and you have kids now or whatever being exploited, and the thought that, Melanie and myself believe there's other years of these videos, and it's like their worst nightmare. Are they going to have to go on like thinking at any moment something could get released, or who has it, who's seen it? So I think about that a lot as well, where just I even have a friend's son who's in elementary school, and he's kind of understands what's going on, but now it's like, I just want to be a good man. And like knowing what Auntie Megan has gone through, and is like, oh, on TV or whatever, and this is what's happening. And it's, no, you got to tell the truth. Like my nephews, like, all I want to do is be a good man. And I'm like, that's awesome. Right. Yeah. But I like having the dialogue too, because it's also one of those things where I had someone recently send me like a compliment, and then they were like, so sorry. And I was like, well, no, thank you. And they're like, well, with everything that, you've gone through. And it's like, there's a big difference between being like respectful and paying a compliment, and like exposing yourself, or like sending like the things. And it's like, that's a part of it too. And then we're also battling the unfortunate scenario of when women or men or whoever are coming forward, in more cases than not, a woman, that's a false claim, right? And so that also hurts all of this too. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of weird dynamics. And it's like, if people were just honest and kind, treat people how you want to be treated, we all know the world would be better. Because
So
I think I've had some men sort of dismiss us just because it's like, oh, the Me Too movement, I've had family members, I've had bad situations and conversations, which you wouldn't believe that, it's like, well, whether you like it or not, like, it is part of this movement that's bigger than myself, right?
you just hit on something about people coming forward, and the big case in the last decade is Duke lacrosse, right?
Yeah.
So I do wonder, and you don't have to get into like specifics, but I do wonder, where do you feel that kickback? You know what I mean? Do you feel that pressure coming the other direction about, oh, you're just another person looking for your 15 minutes of fame? Are you, like, are you just another person trying to latch onto something and get your payout so that you'll
Get our
shut your mouth? Like,
millions. I heard that one this week. That stirred up quite a Twitter storm of
obviously
get your
nobody here
millions and go
believes
away.
that, but I
Yeah.
am curious about that, because
Uh-huh.
I will actively speak against the things that are like with the Duke lacrosse case. Like, that was legitimately terrible. But I'm curious, how much of that are you seeing? How much of it,
I
like,
think
experiencing?
I think it's a lot less than you would realize. I think more people are on the support train than they are on like the critical nature. But I've actually had conversations with women older than me that are much more critical of the Me Too movement. And I would say I've probably had equal amount of conversations with women that kind of go into the, well, what was she thinking? Or the, what was she wearing? Or, which no one has a right to do anything. But I also am trying to have that intersection point of the 19-year-old version of me in that building that was more naive. I never want to believe I was naive, right? But the 19-year-old version of me is very different than the 37-year-old woman. And this is something to me as a people manager and a manager of people managers. I want to be open with conversations where there might be a young woman, or we might be at an industry trade show. And this actually happened last year, where one of them was like, Megan, which outfit do you think I should wear? Like, very planning things out. And I said, either one, whatever you feel comfortable in. And she's like, well, which one would you wear? And it's interesting because I have found myself wearing more like pants and suits than skirts and dresses. But at the same time, if I wanted to wear a skirt or a dress, I absolutely should. But I know what will get me less attention. And I know that sounds terrible to say, but it is a real conversation that I've even recently had with a woman that is older than me in my work industry. And I said, well, I think now there needs to be that level similar to how we train and teach harassment training and young men, young women, how to treat each other. I think we also need to feel comfortable helping coach those younger people too, in terms of, like, if I have a younger coworker, or, my niece is like 15, we're going to have a lot of conversations. But if you're out at a work function, like not letting someone walk you to your room, simple things that might seem like, oh, I care about you, I want to make sure you get home safely, often could end up in a situation, or out at, a reception or whatever, but you realize people are drinking a lot. Like, for me, the older version of me, I'm just going to remove myself from the situation and kind of fade out versus staying till the last person. And it's like, while I should be able to do that and stay there, it's like, I think there's just this level of education and talking through certain situations that might come up and how to navigate them. Because even when you look back at some of those text messages that were exchanged, and people were critical of a few of the responses, I think, where like some of the fellows that got in trouble in the scouting department, and it was like laughing back. But I think that's also a very natural response of like, how do I handle this? How do I respond? And like, it's this nervous laugh versus
Like a de-escalation versus something else.
yeah. And I
So
think that's interesting.
You're talking about having those kind of conversations with young people or inexperienced people. But really, I think those are the kinds of things that the NFL needs to focus on, is because I think there's this misconception that, oh, we just hired bad people. No, it's not. I mean, I bet you there were a lot of mid-level people that had they had good leadership, maybe they would have learned that, like, this is how we operate as a professional, as a young
100%.
executive or whatever. And I'm not blaming it all on Dan Snyder. There's certainly a lot of other people involved, but I just think it's complicated. And I mean, I learned the hard way. I would never close my office door when I had female employees that I had to do
Mhm.
employee evaluations on, just because, and I was taught that, like, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I'm,
Yeah.
that I'm safe with the door shut, but it's just knowing that it's just the right thing to do. And it's a good habit. And then I don't have to worry about them feeling uncomfortable or someone else having
Right.
but I just think there's a lot. I think that kind of mindset, there's at least a big chunk of the NFL that doesn't. They just, like I said earlier, they have not gotten to the year 2023, and there's, as far as employment practices and policies and governance, they just don't have what they need to have in place.
I like this conversation. It's definitely what I'm going to reflect on more, because in different industries, and I'm really well aware of, like, say there's different meetings and you might be the only female, or there's a couple females, and then they decide they're going to go do something else, but all of a sudden, like, the women might not be included, or like, I think there's things that happen where they might not realize. And frankly, I think sometimes that could impact, you still could talk work, talk business, but it is an interesting environment in terms of business too, where, decisions might be made, promotions might be made, how much time you're spending with people, you're having these conversations. But, if you're the only female at a retreat or a leadership thing, you might just be like, actually, I'm going to go back, but is that going to be detrimental to my advancement because I'm not in the circle, right? And I think that it's an interesting one, because I want to hear the male perspective too, in terms of, they obviously don't want to say or do anything that could get them into any trouble. So I think it's a complex one, but I think there has to be conversation about it. Otherwise, like, this stuff doesn't get resolved. And I think about one of the fellas that was in the scouting department who I considered a friend. He was not appropriate. He did have repercussions for everything that happened. But I think about him a lot because this is my own way of living now. But I feel like if I had corrected him or really put him in his place, and I think we could have had that dialogue, it could have saved him from all of this additional things that have happened in his life since. And also the pain of women that also experience that. And I know it's not my responsibility to help someone and educate them, but I am going to take that on in my life, where it's kind of hitting it head on, because that completely had a domino effect, right? So I think it's kind of like, what's our role and responsibility versus formal training too.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different perspective. I'm in tech as well,
Yeah.
Megan, and have been for the last 24 years. For the last, almost 20 of that 24, I don't know, 18 of that 24, I have either reported directly to a woman or dotted line, right? And the dotted line was stronger than my actual direct report. My direct report basically took care of giving me end of year reviews and, pay raises, but I worked day in, day out with a woman who was the account rep, the account manager. And as you know, in the sales world, the account manager is the end all be all. And I'm a gearhead, right? I answer to the account reps. And so I have worked for women. Do you have a responsibility to correct it? No. I will say that I believe it is every person's responsibility to say when they are not comfortable, to stand up for themselves and say, I don't know how to correct your behavior, but your behavior towards me at the moment is not appropriate. I don't appreciate it. It needs to go away. And I don't know, I'm a little weird, I guess, because my first call isn't to HR. My first call is to the person that I've got a problem with. and I say it, and then I may tell my boss about it, because it's got to be reported someplace if you're going to ever do anything about it serious. And if it comes back, you've got to kind of have that record of it. I hate that. I really hate that, because it feels sometimes like I'm taking away the ability for a person to recognize, make a change, and not be impacted in some way, shape, or form. Corporate America, that shit follows you now, right? One bad moment, maybe you're having a lousy day, maybe, there's so many different things that impact everybody. And I've had a couple of women say things that were inappropriate to me, and it's like, wait a minute, now, does it happen to me as much as it probably has happened to them in their career? Oh, hell no. Probably not. It's probably not happened to me as much in my career as it's happened to them in a year or a month. And I fully recognize that fact, but there's a responsibility there to stand up and go, no, sorry, I'm not taking that. And maybe I'm not turning you in, and I can't fix it for you, but don't you talk to me that way again. And I appreciate the fact that you're thinking about that. I got to tell you, this whole thing has me thinking about it. It also has me thinking about how to talk to my kids about it. They're both teenagers. They're headed off into the business, the corporate world. John, you probably have some thoughts about this with, your daughter out in the corporate world at this point in time. And I just, I know what I've witnessed for 25 years. And I've got to tell you, there's a handful of times I don't feel like I've exactly covered myself in glory. Not that I was an instigator, but I sure didn't step in and go, hey, knock it off. This is inappropriate. Everybody just go to your own corner, right? But
well, I hate the culture word because I've heard it so many times over the last 3 years.
yeah,
But I do think a lot of it goes back to every member of an organization, they should know like where the lines are and what the expectations are and what's okay and what's not okay and what's going to happen if you don't adhere to basic principles. And the problem, what got Dan Snyder in so much of a pickle was there was none of that, and he didn't want any of it. He actively went out of his way to make sure there wasn't a strong HR,
right.
that executives were protected and were, as Megan said, they were the least ones that were held accountable, not the ones that were most highly held accountable. So it shouldn't ever be one individual.
That was the bigger point is was there a certain level at the top that you could reach at the ceiling that would make sure that everything was okay? And I think that was the bigger problem was that you would go with as far up the food chain as you could go, and you never found that
What's
that
interesting,
person that could enforce it down to say, we've reached the behavior that is unacceptable. We've reached a level that we can no longer, we have to take action. And it didn't exist in this instance.
there was one situation where another player, or it might have been the same one that I referenced earlier, but I didn't give up the names,
I still want that mic drop, Megan.
was disrespectful to me. And a few players actually stepped in, like, don't talk to her like that, kind of thing. And it got to a head. And then I might have said something like, don't let my name ever come out of your mouth. Like, I was like,
Megan, you need to find your way to Northern Virginia. We're gonna go have a drink and we're gonna have some conversations.
He just wants that name.
Well, the good news on this one is I did see this person prior to leaving Texas randomly out, and we actually had a conversation, and it was a grown one where we're cool now, but it's still one of those things where there's a lot of immaturity, I think, too, on that type of realm where you have a lot of people. I mean, they were in their early 20s too. So I remember one incident though where I was like, oh, that, like, because it got very heated and I raised my voice and I went directly upstairs and went to, instead of the HR person, because I didn't think that was a thing, I went to my boss. At the time it was Larry. I also went to that player's coach, who I was cool with. And I just said, look, I think I handled this, but I want you to know, like, there's a situation and I absolutely understand, like, you're going to pick this starting player that makes you millions of dollars over me. But I just want you to be aware, and like, I hope if I need you, you know, we can squash this kind of thing. So similarly, one of the things I've been trying to do, and I was trying to do back then, was like try to hit it head on as best I could. And then I had interns as well that I was super protective over. And that got really tough for me, because then I thought about my own experiences, and here I have young women, and I'm like, I don't want this to perpetuate, and I really couldn't do anything. And that's the part that is so frustrating, because now when I hear some of the stories or people that came after me that I didn't know, I'm like, wow, like, could I have done more? Absolutely, I'm sure I could have, but I wasn't the same person then that I am now. I didn't have the fury. I didn't have, like, you know, something clicked when that article hit in July of 2020, like, lawyering up, like I'm over it. And working in corporate America, and when you become like a manager and a people manager and you're working for a functional organization, there's obviously still issues that happen, but it's certainly one where, to your point, I think the common courtesy of, hey, this was disrespectful, or I did not appreciate this, and depending on the severity, of course. And I've had situations like that where I've had a gentleman had a couple drinks, grabbed my rear a few years ago. It was first week on a job, I kid you not. And I just pulled him to the side, and I was
Post
like,
NFL? You're talking post
no,
NFL,
this
right?
was in tech. I pulled him to the side and I said, hey, like, I don't know what you think that was. I don't know why that occurred. I'm like week one on the job. Also, my referral was one of our heads of like worldwide sales, like has some clout. And I was like, I manage a team and I have women on my team, and I am going to have you around them. Like, I reamed into him real quick on, that's not acceptable. He then goes on this rant of, I'm so sorry, I'm about to get divorced. And like, I understand things are going
That's not your
wrong
problem.
in
That's
your
his
life,
problem.
but let's get you with, you know, maybe a therapist is in order versus more beer or liquor. But it was one of those kind of conversations where like, then we were okay after it. But I do regret, I did not go to that person's manager. I think I should have done that. So I was learning along the way, and it was overwhelming. That was like my first week on the job. And here I am, like, about to be like, here you are grabbing my butt, like out at a corporate function. Like, where in your right mind is that acceptable? I mean, and then you're kind of in this state of shock, and then I'm angry because I'm like, is this going to be, and I'm just wearing like, and I told you, I'm wearing like the pantsuit, and I'm wearing, like, I'm not, like, I don't know how much I've told you guys, even when I'm back at the Redskin days, of like, I tried out different hairstyles. I tried out not wearing makeup. I tried wearing the baggy pants. I wore like training camp. I remember I had on like the basketball shorts that you got at Kohl's. It wasn't even like a sanctioned outfit. Like, I tried the different things, and I learned really quickly, when you're around like 70, 80 men, there, you know, there's a type for everyone. You're going to get attention. So that's where I was like, it's been a battle of like knowing it's a weird thing to navigate. I would definitely say that, but that really, that pissed me off very, very much. So, and I was just in the state of shock, like what?
Yeah, we have no idea. Men have no idea what, we really don't. Like Bob referenced it earlier, you know, we don't, we really have no possible clue.
I don't know.
We don't.
No,
I've got to,
yeah, I've got to agree
I
with
will
John.
never say, I will never say it's on the same level, but I can speak personally that there are plenty of men that have been taking advantage of women who are authority figures. Okay, so that, like, no, I'm not playing this world's smallest violin. I get it, but I think the bigger issue, and that Megan gets to, is that there is a workplace issue, and it's well beyond just, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the small conversations. It's a big conversation. There are conversations that need to be had, and maybe it might not be global. You know, it might not be everybody that ever has to. You know, there's not some movement we need to get on, but at the same time, we need to have these open conversations, and we need to be able to look each other in the eye and say, this is unacceptable, regardless of where your stance is. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what any other aspect of it. If you're looking up and somebody wants to use their title or their level of ownership in a business or a company to
Or
look
their
down on
money.
somebody
Let's just
and
put
take
it out there,
advantage of
Derek.
it,
Their money.
their money, that's not something that can be endorsed on any level, one way or another. It's unacceptable.
I'm
But
glad we're having the discussions because I think they need to happen more. This actually, like I said before we started recording, I'm like the past 3 years has really inspired me and challenged my thought process, made me really think about the younger version of myself versus the current version. And like, if I were in that organization hired today in my late 30s, how would that experience look, right? And that's what I kept trying to tell people too, is that my experience between 19 years old and 25 years old might have been completely different than someone that was like 35 to 45, right? And there's a lot of learnings that happen, and the people that were supposed to protect us didn't. And maybe we were there as eye candy and that was our role, but we thought we had all these hopes and dreams and we're gonna, make it in professional sports. So I think it's
and you were sold a different bill of goods.
right.
Like you weren't hired on to say, hey, you're just gonna walk around and be, pleasant to
Right. Get
WSA
coffee,
9.
right? Yeah.
You had some sort of
But I think
false
that's
narrative.
the phase of like how we evolve and the evolvement, and we're always learning. And that's what I appreciate about this conversation is like, I think we're all going to reflect on other things on, wow, like how can we continue to get better? And I think these challenging, they call them, I think in corporate America, crucial conversations or what, like let's have a crucial conversation, but
I have the book if you want to borrow it.
yeah, no, I have a few of them too, but it's in the getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, right? But I really do feel like this has helped me realize that there is a bigger conversation that needs to be had. And even though people take their trainings and these corny videos and stuff, I mean, we all kind of laugh at some of the videos that you have to go through actual training on, but these are like real life scenarios that actually happen. And I don't think people really talk about real life scenarios of, so I'm doing my presentation, I go to the reception with everyone else, and then one of the, lead people grabs my butt or wants to talk to me later, but why don't you come over to the hotel? Well, no, I'm not going to do that either. But then it's a leader that has the power. So yeah, I feel like as we're talking, I have more and more of these experience outside of professional sports too.
Right.
That it's just not okay. And at some point, like there was never accountability, or the power changed someone, or maybe they were always that way. I don't know. There's an interesting dynamic though.
So
Well, you should be very proud because we just spent 90 minutes talking about misogyny and sexual harassment when normally we would be going on and on about Chase Young being absent from OTAs, Armani Rogers tore his Achilles today, and the gang that can't shoot straight could not get the Washington Commanders game past the U.S. Patent Office. That's latest news. So I'm just so thankful that we're talking about things that matter and not those things. But we appreciate you, Megan, and
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I'm going to challenge you, even though who the hell am I to challenge you? But I'm going to challenge you. Think about this and maybe chat with your attorneys and your peers. Maybe you guys should approach the Harris Group once all the ink is dry and they've kind of got moved into wherever they're going to move into. Maybe you guys could reach out to them and say, hey, this is just an idea, but we know what happened, but we want you to really know what happened. And we would love to sit down with you and talk about what our experiences was so that you can make sure nothing like that ever happens again. But
And I think they could influence the other organizations too, because I think these conversations actually have to happen. And they don't want to, they don't want to hear from us, or they'll see whatever report versions they see, but no, none of them want to give up their teams, right? And this is, the diversity and inclusion stuff's not going away, and they have to face the music on it.
That's why it's kind of important to get the Harris Group now. Then in why I'm with John on this. it would be really good to get with them now, before they can get indoctrinated. I mean,
I agree.
Magic Johnson and some of the other guys, they're not going to get
Just
it. They're,
dial up
they
Magic.
won't assimilate, but at the same time, they're not in that circle. I mean, Harris is in the circle a little bit because he's a partial owner of the Steelers, but this
Well,
is
my hope is
where
that they don't have to be approached. My hope is that if they're smart, they would
they'll,
recognize
it'll be a
where we've
reciprocal
been
conversation.
and do the right thing. But
Yeah, I think so too. There's been a lot of debate on whether or not, Mary Jo White reports should be released now or later, let them get acclimated. And I'm like, rip off the Band-Aid now, let them know what the history of this
Yeah,
organization
why
is.
wait? What's the point of
Yeah.
waiting?
And I wouldn't, who knows what's shared behind closed doors? Like, for all I know, maybe they've seen something, we don't
Yeah.
know.
I was going to say, if I were part of the group trying to buy the business,
Yeah, I'd want
and
full
at the end of the day, I mean, this is an iconic U.S. sports team, but even though we fans feel differently about it than maybe we do, Chevrolet or Coke or whatever, right? It's just a business. At the end of the day, it is just a business like everybody else. And if Harris and Rawls and Johnson and everybody else on that team did not approach this like a business acquisition, they're remiss, and I'm a little worried about, the ownership group. But B, if they didn't go in and say, as part of our discovery process, as part of our investigative process, we want to see what you've got on this team. It's a requirement. If you want me to bid on this team, I have to see the reports that you've got at this point in time. And I think under the circumstances, they hold the power, not the NFL at that point in time, because the NFL wanted Dan out.
Agreed.
And I think the message there is any responsible person looking to take over the organization is going to want to know what the exposure is like at that point in time.
I hope they did the due diligence, because I know, Jason Wright has his version of like all the changes, all the things they've done, but I think it would be a big mistake to not know exactly what went on and what they were getting into as well.
You can't measure those changes if you don't know where things started.
Exactly.
You have to know where point A was to know how far down the alphabet we've gotten at this point in time. And
Exactly.
and I feel like with some of the things that I've read in the last week about Josh Harris, I feel like maybe he's that kind of guy. And John's no, yeah, it was you with Mitchell Rawls and the stuff about Mitchell's business and everything he's done, and the honor and the professionalism that he approaches his businesses with. Apparently, I would like to feel like those two guys went into Roger Goodell's office and went, "Give me the fucking report." Just quit messing around and show me what I'm buying, because otherwise I'm not buying it. So,
Megan, I would have introduced you to my wife in the background, but she was on the floor getting her dryer.
Nice.
Megan,
She's a lovely woman. You'll just have to take my word for it.
it wouldn't be a podcast if John's wife didn't sneak through the door.
I'm actually surprised. Like, Sky's just been sleeping the whole time. We haven't even had a disruption. It's
Yeah.
shocking.
Megan, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I am going to hold you to that game. We will go to a game together. We need to tailgate together.
Yeah, it'd be nice to be at a new stadium too. That would be lovely.
Yes. So if you find your way up here in Northern Virginia, up around the stadium for a game, we need to get together and hang out.
I think it would be fun to, at some point when the sale's final, I'm sure, I don't know, party, a parade or some kind of thing. I'll definitely fly back for any of those. I think those are some historical memories that are in the making there too.
Well, we will be watching to see what happens over the next months and beyond that. And if there's anything that we can do to help the cause, please let us know.
Yeah.
Thank you for
And
having me.
thank you for joining us. BGO will be annoying you beyond words. We're be hashtagging and pinging you and tagging you and everything we can do. So,
and I appreciate this conversation, and you're getting me thinking more about the bigger picture too of what we're doing. So thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.